This is always the hardest kind of video for me to make because I don't like being negative. Hey everyone, welcome back to Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and as always guys, I am Andrew, and today we are doing the most disappointing reads of 2023 that I had here on the channel. But before we get into that, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, as it does help the channel grow. And you can check the description box down below for all the links to my social media, including Patreon, Discord, Amazon wishlist, what have you. It's all there for you to explore. Now, caveat before we jump into this is my own subjective opinion. Reading is a subjective hobby, and my opinions are my own. I am not saying that these are bad books. They just, maybe I had an expectation that wasn't quite fully met, or maybe it was just the book wasn't right for me, or I read it when I wasn't in the mood, or I forced myself through it, and therefore I didn't get the best enjoyment that I possibly could out of the series. This is disappointing, not bad. So without really mucking about anymore, I'm just going to jump right on into the list. This is more than 10 books because I read 140 books and I literally scrolled through Goodreads. I did not include books on series that I DNF'd or NFN'd. These are all books that I completed, and we're going to start with books 2 and 3. This is one where I forced myself to finish these, not because they were bad. I just thought that they were messy. And this is Draconis Memoria, and let's see, here's book 2. This is The Legion of Flame, and book 3, Empire of Ashes. And I think my issue here is, I did these on audio, and I know I don't like the narrator, so I shouldn't have done that. But this was done and read for my Patreon, where essentially every quarter patrons get to vote on a trilogy that I will read, and then they can either choose to read along with me or just see my comments in the Discord as I read that series. And this one, it just felt so busy and so messy, on top, paired with the fact that I don't like that narrator, and it just didn't end up working. And it was just kind of, I don't know, I should have slowed down, I should have taken my time with it, and I should have stopped listening to the narrator. And for the life of me right now that I've mentioned a person's name, I can't think of it. And that's awful. But Stephen Brand, there we go, Stephen Brand. It's mean, but I call him Stephen Bland. He just doesn't inflect. He's got an amazing voice, and he just does zero inflection when he's doing audiobooks, and so that kind of makes it very hard to get into. But yeah, those are the first two. I did force myself to finish that, and then I started pulling the ripcord a lot more on those patron reads, and then I was just constantly submitting polls on Patreon. I was like, guys, come on, let's get another one going. I did that like 2 times this year. Next up, we have got a Stephen King book, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, and this is up to expectation, because going up to this, everyone was like, oh, it's so creepy, it's so amazing, and I was like, it's a very simple premise where a girl kind of gets tired of her squabbling family and decides to separate to kind of scare them, and then actually gets lost in the woods. And I didn't see anything particularly scary about that. And so this one was just an expectation. I expected this to be a lot scarier than it was. But other than that, though, it was a good read. I didn't hate reading this. It just didn't fulfill my expectations. So that's The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. Next up, we have got Larry Correa's The Saga of the Forgotten Warrior. And this one is also an expectation thing, because as I was reading this series, everyone was just like, oh, Larry Correa, Saga of the Forgotten Warrior, so good. I had already read, I think, the first 7 or 8 of the Monster Hunter Internationals, and I had done the trilogy, The Grim Noir Chronicles, and I loved those. I loved Grim Noir Chronicles, and then I love the first 5 Monster Hunters, and I feel like that series getting a bit long in the tooth. But I was excited to get into this, and then, I was 20% in, and I was like, oh no, I don't like this at all. And then it does a twist, and I was like, okay, it's redeemed. And then I got to book 2, which I think this is book 2, House of Assassins. I meant to hold up the Black Sword. That's the one where I got 20% in, and I was just like, this isn't for me. I don't, this is very basic. And then it does a cool little twist, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then I got to book 2, and it did the same thing. And I've been on hiatus with it ever since. I just end up, not really enjoying the first 40% of the book. And then I felt like once I'm like halfway through the book, I'm like, okay, it's pretty good. But I don't know. I was expecting to absolutely love this series and be blown away by it, and I just wasn't. All right, and then don't worry, guys. I got a whole list of stuff that I have since unhauled. I don't even own these books anymore. But this one hurts because I didn't do a review for this one. I really wanted to do a review for this one. I loved the first 2 books, but we're going to be talking about Shadowfane. This is Janie Ward's book 3, Cycle of Fire. And this is one I do want to revisit at some point down the road because, like, I did it on audio, and the audiobooks were very, very good, but towards the end of Shadowfane, like, stuff just starts happening very quickly, like a lot more quickly than it's ever happened in the trilogy. And I don't know if I don't think I was able to keep up with what was going on. So by the time we get to the ending, I had to listen to the ending like 4 times, and I still didn't fully understand what had happened. And so that's one I want to come back and kind of revisit, because Janie Wirtz is like an author who either really works for me, or it's kind of like, oh, this is pretty good. I read Daughter of the Empire. There we go. Daughter of the Empire. I had to knock it loose. I didn't just enjoy. I loved reading Daughter of the Empire, and then like Mistress, the follow-up, or it's either Mistress or Servant. I don't actually know in my brain which one's which. The sequel to Daughter just didn't work for me, and so like Janie's just one of those where it's like it's either gonna work for me or it's not. All right, now we're gonna move into the ones where I don't own physically. We're gonna start off with Uzumaki by Junji Ito. I don't get it. I don't understand. And this just kind of boils down to maybe it's a cultural thing that I just don't get. But, like, the whole time, at least through 70% of the book, like, I'm just like, just leave. What are you doing? Just leave. And they just never do. And it just boggled my mind that, like, everybody was just okay. Like, they weren't okay with what happened. They were clearly traumatized, but they just kept enduring it. And then the end of the story came around, and I just didn't understand. The reviews leading up to it were just like, oh, this is like so psychological. It's going to give you horror. You're never going to be able to look at the spiral the same way again. I've never had an issue with the spiral since reading Uzumaki. I just didn't understand the hype for this. I've been told Junji Ito's either one who works for you or who doesn't. And clearly, this just didn't work for me. That's the best way I can put it. Next up, we've got Jake's Magical Market, and I'm blanking on the author's name. It'll be on the book cover right here. But Jake's Magical Market is it's basically like alien invasion. They come in, they rearrange the world, and they make humans fight for their amusement type of deal. Kind of like Dungeon Crawler Carl, but like a little bit more cozy. And the first half of the book was amazing. The second half of the book went completely off the rails. None of the goals to get back to the first part of the book were ever accomplished, and it felt like it just lost its way. And it wasn't particularly a short book. It was relatively long. It just felt like we did a thing, and then we were never able to return to our origin point, which was kind of the whole point of the thing that happens, and it just fails to do any of that. And I just kind of like really was ready for this to be done by the time I finished it. Like it did not, the second half of that book did not live up to the first half. It felt like they were completely separate books and separate ideas that were kind of just jammed together to try and make a cohesive novel. And it felt like 2 genres just kind of smushed and smashed together. Very, very strange. Very odd. Then we've got one. It was my first James Bond book by Ian Fleming. And this was for a readathon. I read it for a prompt, and it was like read one with an element in the name, and Golden Gun, so gold was in the name. I've always wanted to read a James Bond book. Like, I've constantly eyed Ian Fleming's works because I loved the movies so much. The Man with the Golden Gun is barely resembles the movie. Like, I think it takes Scaramanga's name, the fact that he has a golden gun, and that there's a character named James Bond in it. Like, that's pretty much all that's the same. Everything else is different in the movie. Of course, I grew up on the movie, and I've probably watched the movie 15 to 20 times, and so the fact that it was just so wildly different I couldn't reconcile it. I hated reading that book, but I forced myself to finish it for a readathon. So I actually ended up unhauling all of my James Bond books because of The Man of the Golden Gun, which is maybe not unfair, which might be unfair, I should say, because when at the time of release, Ian Fleming had already passed away, and I mean, like, it was a posthumous release. He was sick when he wrote it, but I just did not like that book. I didn't like it at all. Next one is the hot take. This is the hot take. Y'all are going to come at me in the comments. We're going to talk about Tress of the Emerald Sea. And I didn't hate Tress of the Emerald Sea. I didn't like it. I think the first 20 to 30% when Tress is still at home, I thought it was really great. I thought it was fantastic. I loved Tress. I loved the dynamic. I loved the humor. And then I understand what Sanderson was trying to do with the Reverse Princess Bride thing, with instead of, say, Wesley coming back to save, oh gosh, her name is escaping me. So, editing Andrew here, and immediately as soon as I started editing this portion of the video, it just popped into my head. It's Princess Buttercup. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a masterpiece, and it's Princess Buttercup. I don't know why I struggled so much, but there you go. But basically, like, instead she goes out to save Wesley. I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. I didn't really like the whole narration style of, like, what's going on with a specific Cosmere character. I'm trying to be as, like, non-spoiler as I possibly can. It didn't work for me for that character. I felt like it took a single element of that character's personality and then ramped it up to a thought. It felt like a thought experiment to kind of, like, throw away and play with this idea in Tress and see if I can make it work. And then I'll then recycle this and use it later on in the Cosmere. I felt like that's what Sanderson was doing. Man, I'm so mad that I can't remember that princess's name. It's bugging me. I'm going to immediately look it up as soon as I'm off of here, and then I'm going to feel bad. We've got Khan Engleden next on the list with Lords of the Poe, and this is the Genghis Khan Book 2. And I had my issues with the Wolves of the Plain because certain things didn't quite fit together super well. Certain relationships, because a lot of Genghis Khan's history is just lost. There's like maybe one or two accounts that we know the history of Genghis Khan from. That's all that survived from his time. And so, of course, Khan Engleden is having to go in and make a lot of this up and kind of like stitch stuff together. I just felt like it wasn't done particularly well. And then everything that I loved in book 1, like, we just didn't focus on that at all in Lords of the Bow. And it just didn't work for me. Like, we barely follow Temujin in this book. And I'm just like, Temujin was the main reason I was reading Wolves of the Plain, because of the stuff that he does. And I was just completely checked out the entire book. I didn't care about any of the characters. None of it worked for me. Temujin was just being a butthead. And it was just, I don't know. It just didn't work for me. I don't really want to talk too much about it because I don't know. People love Khan Engleden, and I've still got the Julius Caesar stuff, and I'm very excited to get into the Julius Caesar stuff. I'm also a little bit leery, I think is the word I'm looking for. I'm a little bit cautious to dive into that. I have lowered expectations for that series. Next up, we've got Baden Hill by I Anonymous. And this one makes my list because it felt a bit disjointed, and I know I make this motion a lot when I'm trying to mention disjointed. Like, it felt like the cogs were just not quite lining up to shift smoothly. We were kind of like, we've got an overarching story, and I just don't see it all kind of coming together. The Arthurian aspects didn't really feel particularly necessary to me. And overall, like, I just wasn't particularly invested in the story or the characters that were going on in Baden Hill. I had a little bit of the same issue with Gurzel, but I was still excited to get into Baden Hill because people had said Baden Hill is even better. And it overall was kind of a swing and a miss for me. And then after that, swing and a miss, we've got Dragon Wing. And this is an expectation thing for me. This is Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman. And this makes the list because, essentially, Deathgate Cycle, I was expecting something completely different from Dragonlance, which is on me. it's still Margaret Reyes and Tracy Hickman. They're still the same authors. They're still gonna write characters kind of the same way. That humor was still there, and I wasn't expecting the humor of Deathgate Cycle. There's a little bit of a snarkiness or something within the characters, and there's a wittiness that I wasn't quite anticipating. And I was looking for something at the time just a little bit more adult and a little grimmer. And after reading the first book, like I was like, okay, maybe I'll move on to book 2. And I just never did, and I ended up unhauling the books, so I don't have those anymore. That said, guys, that is all the books on my list for my most disappointing reads of 2023. I plan on doing a most surprising reads list as well, so let me know in the comments if that is something that you want to see. And please, let's drop into the comments. Let's talk about our most disappointing reads of the year. I would love to chat with you there. List them all out, or we could just have a good old discourse going in the comments. Do you agree? Do you disagree with mine? What are yours? And yeah, let's have a good old discussion. I do want to clarify that just because these didn't work for me doesn't mean they won't work for you. But that is all I've really got for you today. So till next time, guys, peace out. Stay magical. Bye. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons. Thank you for supporting my passion and my hobby.